Imagine the Camp Nou at twilight. The light is soft, the noise not yet a roar but a low, expectant hum. And three figures in Blaugrana wait at halfway. One drifts a few steps to the right, head tilted as if listening to music only he can hear. One stands between the center backs, shoulders square, eyes bright with mischief. One bounces on the balls of his feet to the left, restless energy caged in a grin. They share a glance that lasts a heartbeat. And then the ball moves, and with it the stadium, the city, and sometimes the sport itself. Their names are Lionel Messi, Luis Suarez, and Neymar da Silva Santos Jr. Together they would become a single idea with three faces. But before the avalanche of goals, before the records and the arguments about all-time trios, there was doubt and change, and a club asking itself a hard question. How do you carry the future without dropping the past? Barcelona had climbed to the top of the modern game by building a team that moved as if conducted. Passing triangles churned, pressure arrived in packs, and the ball lived at their feet longer than anywhere else. The idea reached its purest form under Pep Guardiola, and its echo lasted beyond him. But football keeps time with a quick metronome. By the spring of 2013, a phrase crept into the Catalan vocabulary and would not leave: Messi dependencia. It was said with a shrug or a sigh, sometimes with gratitude and sometimes with fear. Lionel Messi was, to many, the best player alive. But reliance on one miracle can become a habit, and habits can become cages. The statistics told one story: Messi responsible for a vast share of league goals, assists that bent matches his way, dribbles that reset what seemed possible. The images told another: a team that still moved beautifully, but had begun to fray under stress. A Champions League semi-final in Bavaria ended in a scoreline that felt like a warning siren. A Super Cup setback against Madrid added a sting. The engine still ran, but you could hear a rattle somewhere inside the hood. It was not panic, not in a club that prides itself on patience, but it was a tension sharpened to a point. The board recognized that a philosophy is not a fossil. It must breathe. The plan they formed was not to replace the violin with a drum or to abandon the academy pipeline that had given them an identity. It was to share the weight of creation, to let Messi be everything he could be without forcing him to be everything all the time. The solution sounded simple and risky in equal measure: surround a genius with two more and hope the chemistry favored the team, not the egos. Barcelona had an answer, but answers, like genius, sometimes arrive wearing unfamiliar faces. Who was the boy who dared to share Messi's spotlight? They had already begun. A year before, the partnership had a name, it had a promise. From Santos came a forward who moved like music: Neymar Jr. He was 20 when he signed, a star in South America whose play made old men recall street pitches and made children imitate stepovers in kitchens. He arrived in Barcelona with questions clinging to him like confetti. Could showmanship become efficiency? Could a flair player become a system player? Could a prodigy navigate a dressing room where the dominant star was not only older, but almost a demigod? The first season offered both answers and questions. In a new league, on new pitches, within tactical lines taught with metronomic discipline, he adapted. He learned to press with purpose and to time his runs so that space opened for him like an automatic door. There were flashes that felt like postcards from the future. A header at the Calderón, a delicate toe-poke finish at the Camp Nou after a flowing move, a hat trick under European lights when defenders tried to show him the sideline, and he turned the sideline into a canvas. The numbers ticked upward, goals in the teens, assists likewise, chemistry with teammates that began as politeness and warmed into partnership. Yet the season itself ended bitterly. Atletico Madrid suffocated Barcelona in the Champions League quarter-final, and then, on the league's final day, wrested the title from their hands on Catalan grass. Real Madrid lifted Europe. The club had an heir in the making, but the kingdom felt fragile. Neymar learned something essential in that first campaign. What counts here is not a trick in the corner, but the right action at the right tempo. He also learned that Messi's gravity can feel like both comfort and shadow. The solution would require not just talent, but affection. Friendship makes sacrifice easier. In that dressing room, the Brazilian found compatriots who eased the transition, and a number 10 who, rather than coldly measuring a rival, gave small gestures of welcome. You noticed it in celebrations, the way Messi pointed at the passer, the way Neymar pointed back. Trust began to form, and trust would become fuel. But one star is not enough to balance a crown, and soon Barcelona would chase another, this time a storm wrapped in controversy. That spring and summer of 2014, Barcelona peered at themselves in the mirror and saw two faces, the club that once seemed inevitable and the club that had just stumbled. They chose to rebuild without burning down. A new coach, Luis Enrique, moved from the B team to the first-team bench. He brought a temperament forged in his own playing days, intensity without melodrama, clarity without cruelty, a willingness to make hard choices and a willingness to absorb the blame for them. He believed in the press, in transitions made sharp by fitness, in letting forwards run into space rather than always insisting they knit a sweater in a phone booth. And then came the pursuit that set tongues wagging. In England at Anfield, a striker had just completed a league season that looked cartoonish in its productivity. Luis Suarez scored and snarled and smiled and dragged a red shirt through matches like a dog dragging a stick too big for its mouth. He was chaos and calculation, and he seemed born to play in front of a crowd that wants drama. He was also suspended. The World Cup bite in Brazil, teeth on shoulder, headlines like sirens, a 4-month ban from all footballing activity that meant he could not even participate in a friendly for a new club until late October. The question was as loud as it was obvious. Do you bring a storm into the house if the storm can power your lights? Barcelona decided the answer was yes, not as a thumbs up to infamy, but as a bet on what they saw between the noise. A footballer who combined a 9's ruthless hunger with a 10's generosity, a worker who would run until lungs ached, a passer who saw seams opening a second early, a friend Messi might happily look for and find. The fee was eye-watering, and the ethics debated in every cafe, but the calculation was clear. Put him between Messi and Neymar, and either the sport would gasp in admiration or the project would collapse under the weight of its own daring. Even giants have to risk. Some in Catalonia and beyond clucked their tongues. 3 forwards who loved the ball, 2 with appetites for the spotlight, 1 with a pass that made even neutrals wince. Could this possibly cohere into a team? A famous voice wondered aloud if the club that once made the ball their star was now choosing stardom over the ball. But the 3 men who would live the experiment had a simpler language. They began to talk, to joke, to eat together, to train together. You could see it in the first weeks, even with Suarez restricted to training sessions. They laughed easily. They rehearsed movements without having to rehearse them. A bond grows quickly when the shape of it feels natural. They had their stars, but could even Luis Enrique chart a course that kept brilliance aligned without chaos overwhelming the map? Luis Enrique had to plot a map that kept faith with Barca's soul, while letting legs sprint where logic invited them. The classic plan had Messi as a false 9, a ghost in the middle who drifted into pockets and made defenders look like they were herding smoke. But with Suarez available to lead the line, and with Neymar eager to cook on the left, Enrique redrew the front line's geometry. Messi would start nominally from the right, giving him a full-throttle runway to cut inside on his left or to thread passes along the floor like needles. Suarez would start in the center, occupying center backs, wrestling for position, dropping into pockets to bounce 1-2s. Neymar would start on the left, where a wider angle of approach gave him room to quicken the pulse of a fullback, and when the mood struck, to drift inside onto his right foot for that arrow to the far post. On paper, it was simple. In movement, it became something else. The positions were homes, not prisons. They would swap without announcing it. Sometimes Messi arrived down the middle and Suarez sloped right to drag a defender and open the lane. Sometimes Neymar hugged the paint wide. Sometimes he appeared at the penalty spot like a dancer stepping through a curtain. The midfield adjusted as well. Sometimes the best way to honor a past is to play it in a new key. Iniesta still turned out of pressure the way a matador turns a charge. A younger midfielder arrived with a stride that 8 yards and a shot that snapped the net. A German goalkeeper with brave feet learned a city's rhythm. A tall keeper from Basque country guarded league matches with authority. Fullbacks climbed as high as wingers sometimes because this club's idea of width is a kind of citizenship. Every player contributes. Before Suarez could test the plan under lights, autumn began without him. The first league weeks of 2014 brought results that soothed and performances that flickered. Neymar and Messi began to look like they were finishing each other's sentences. There is a distinctive sight in football that tells you two forwards are beginning to harmonize. A run made without the ball that the passer sees before the runner makes it. At Valencia, at Villarreal, at home against teams that arrived with 10 men and hope, those runs began to show. Neymar's finishing grew colder even as his dribbling stayed hot. Messi, from the right, saw the whole stage and conducted it with wrist flicks and shoulder feints. He kissed the record books in November with a hat-trick that made old tallies look temporary. In Europe, he was greedy with history again, scoring 3 against Nicosia like he was adjusting the furniture. The table, however, is a story told over months, and Madrid piled wins into a mound before the winter. Barcelona's own nights teetered between commanding and frustrating. The newness of things shows up in small cracks, a passing lane chosen too safe, a press not triggered because the mutual signal did not flash at the same instant. Luis Enrique rotated. He trusted legs and numbers, and he was not afraid to sit a star if the calendar suggested rest. That is the sort of decision that the outside applauds in theory and resents in practice when a result goes sideways. It takes time for a squad to learn a coach, and for a coach to learn which strings can be pulled without snapping. The plan was drawn, yet theory means nothing without proof. The test, fiery and fierce, awaited in the capital. When the calendar finally lifted its ban, Suarez's first minutes in Blaugrana arrived not under soft lights, but under lightning. The Bernabeu, late October, the largest stage that Spanish club football can offer. The new number 9 had not played a competitive minute for months, and yet in those opening breaths he did what he was hired to do. He saw a line, he hit it, and Neymar burst through to score with that finisher's calm. For a moment it seemed like a film would write itself, but Madrid came back, and then came over them. And the night ended with Barcelona taking a lesson in humility out of the capital. Suarez's lungs burned, his touch betrayed rust more than once, but there was enough in the 90 minutes to make a promise. He leaned into center backs, and they rocked backward. He chased lost causes and made them found. He shaped one first-time pass into Messi's stride that made defenders look at each other as if to ask who had left the door unlatched. After the Clásico, the weeks felt like a winter that could not decide whether it wanted to snow or shine. Barcelona won, and won big at times. They also stumbled at home to Celta in a night that needed one more pass or one less touch. In Paris, they took a punch and did not respond in time. In Amsterdam, they showed the other face. controlling, without panic. Messi toggled between scorer and butler, answering the occasion with whichever gift was most needed. In those weeks, you saw Suarez's value even when his name was not on the scoreboard. He pressed, and the line behind him followed because pressing is contagious. He dropped into the half space, rolled a center back onto his wrong foot, and then played a reverse pass so sensible that it looked like magic to anyone who had not seen it coming. The goals would arrive. You could feel them queuing. Neymar, in the meantime, began to look like the player Barcelona had signed, and the player he wanted to become. The Brazilian learned a new restraint without losing his joy. Instead of dribbling 3 when 1 would do, he dribbled once and chose the shot. When 3 were required, he danced through 3 and left a fullback staring at his bootlaces. There is a moment other players notice and file away under the word danger. When an attacker receives a pass, takes one small touch while the defender counts the options, and then does the 4th option. Neymar lived in those moments. He began to score the 2nd goal in games that used to become nervy. He began to draw a 2nd defender, and when he did, he smiled and rolled the ball behind the leg that reached for it. Messi's move to the right did not reduce him. It reintroduced him. The right flank gave him the whole field as a palette. He could stay wide to drag a fullback into a choice between prudence and embarrassment. He could cut inside into the half space and become a number 10, playing a pass that started flat and ended curved because his left foot decided it would. He could sprint into the box as a 9, and the coincidence of timing looked like telepathy, because to defenders, the ball and Messi arrived at the same instant from different places. He did not ask the others to work for him, as much as he invited them into his work. When Suarez checked toward the ball, Messi slid into the space he left. When Neymar drifted inward to a pocket next to the penalty spot, Messi, now central, dragged a defender slightly to clear a corridor. When their movements aligned, a defense could look correct on a still frame and wrong in motion. That is the hardest thing to coach against. A plan that fails not because it is a bad plan, but because the solution it tries to solve morphs every time you look at it. By mid-December, the Trident had scored, combined, and teased enough to convince skeptics that the plan could work, and to convince supporters that the plan could become something no one had fully imagined. The fire had been lit. Barcelona would soon face a quiet tension, one that could either sharpen or shatter the edge they'd just forged. The last days of the year were a study in contrasts. Barcelona strode through European nights with confidence and licked their lips seeing spring on the horizon. In the league, Madrid's earlier run meant the margin for error remained thin. Luis Enrique, by temperament and by conviction, leaned into squad rotation during a calendar crush. He would stand at the training ground in the morning, look at the week's load and the minutes in each player's legs, and draw a team sheet with his jaw set and his mind made up. Players understand rotations with their heads. They sometimes misunderstand them with their hearts. When the whistle goes and a chance is missed, when a game looks flat, trust must bridge the gap between intention and outcome. What you heard, if you listened closely to Barcelona's December, were 2 sounds layered atop one another. On the surface, you heard the cheer after a team goal that pinged from right to left to middle and then in. Underneath, you heard the small creak of a door hinge as pressure began to build. It is not that the football was poor, it was often excellent. It is that the bar for this club and these players had moved so high it began to brush the rafters. You could outshoot an opponent and still face questions the next morning because you had not won by 4. You could rotate and preserve legs and still be told you should have played the star who would have made the difference after all. The dressing room is a place of jokes and music and quick words said quietly when the cameras are not there. In those days, certain quiet words were spoken. Messi wanted clarity, the sort of team gets when roles lock into place like gears. Neymar wanted responsibility to grow without arrogance. Suarez wanted to score because goals are the language he speaks most comfortably. Luis Enrique wanted obedience to the plan and commitment to the press because when those two things hold, everything else looks inevitable. Veterans put arms around shoulders. Iniesta spoke less than he used to and said more. Busquets understood distances that others sense only dimly and pointed with his chin when a teammate stood 2 steps too far this way or that. The hinge creaked because of context as much as results. Real Madrid looked imperious for a stretch. Atletico looked tireless, as if they had decided jogging was a sin. The Champions League, for all its glamour, is a competition that makes otherwise rational club rooms feel superstitious. Knockout ties carve scars fast, and a fixture that arrives with the new year has been, in recent seasons, a vexing trip. Away to Real Sociedad, in a stadium where Barcelona sometimes looked as if gravity had been made slightly heavier.
No one could know that a defeat there would force a reckoning that would change everything. No one could know that a week later, a home match against a team of relentless competitors would become not just another entry in the fixture list, but a statement that would make the winter flip into spring. You could only feel it then as a kind of static in the night air. The 3 forwards were smiling more often now. They were spending minutes together after training working on small movements, asking for the ball on this foot rather than that, agreeing with a nod that the third man run would be made even if it was not found every time, robbing defenders of the comfort of anticipating the next pass. As the year turned, the Camp Nou looked like itself again. A place where children dragged their parents down the steps faster than the parents wanted to go, where older fans sat a little forward in their seats when Messi picked up the ball near the touchline, where even the cynical felt the pull of the game's old promise. In the city, murals of the 3 had begun to appear in places where the only art before had been laughter. The trio's friendship had already leaked into the culture around them. Photographs from training ground barbecues circulated. Too often we confuse ease with lack of seriousness. Here, ease was the product of seriousness. Men who do hard things learn to smile with the colleagues who do them with you. Part 1 ends where a long story tends to gather a breath, just before a sharp bend in the road. The bend will do what bends always do. It will throw some out of the seat and remind the rest why they buckled their belts in the first place. There will be a defeat that tastes like medicine. There will be a conversation in a room with the door shut. There will be a game that feels like a verdict and ends up being a beginning. And there will be a trio whose idea becomes a fact, then a fear, then a joy. For now, hold the picture of 3 shadows at dusk, and know that when the sun rises on the new year, they will step into the light together, and the speed at which everything changes will make time itself look slow. Yet behind the calm before turning tides, opponents began whispering names, not in admiration but in quiet fear. Names ready to answer every doubt.
If you are enjoying the story, leave a like and comment down below your favorite moment from this story so far. You can chart a forward line's growth by the way opponents talk about it. Early in the season, defenders spoke about Barcelona in generalities, their movement, their patience, their press. By winter, you heard more specific sentences. Watch Suarez's first touch in the box. Show Neymar to the sideline and do not bite on the feint. Track Messi with eyes, not just with legs, because the pass leaves his foot at the moment you blink. Coaches set traps and watched the ball roll around them like water finds a path around a rock. The lesson was not that Barcelona had become unstoppable. No team is. It was that you had to play a perfect game to stop them, and you had to repeat that perfection 3 times in 3 zones in 3 seconds. 1 lapse, 1 defender half a step late, 1 midfielder who watched the ball instead of the runner, and the move was already done. You can measure the change inside Barcelona too. The midfield learned the timings. Rakitic discovered that the run beyond the line was not a luxury but a duty, and that if he made it without the ball, he often got the ball on the second beat, because the first beat had occupied someone else. Jordi Alba began to appear like a flash photograph at the far post. Dani Alves picked lines that felt like diagonals drawn with a compass. Mascherano, with a heart size that never fit inside the rib cage, defended space as if it were a person he cared about. Piqué, a defender who loves the theater of big nights, calibrated his positioning to account for a 9 who sometimes wandered and a right winger who was not a right winger for more than the opening whistle. Those are the undernotes that support the melody. The melody remained the three forwards, and the song they began to sing had verses and choruses. There was the chorus where Messi dipped inside, bounced the ball off Suarez's boot, and received it back inside the box. There was the verse where Neymar attacked a backpedaling defender, slowed for a microsecond to freeze the feet in front of him, then went again into the channel where the pass would arrive because it had to. There was the bridge where Suarez's run, diagonal and short at first, then long and straight, split the line and forced a decision. Go with him and leave space at the top of the box for a shot, or hold the line and concede the lane behind you where a chip could land like a coin in a fountain. You could feel the difference between coordinated talent and actual chemistry. The former wins matches, the latter wins months. As December deepened, Barcelona felt both familiar and new. Familiar because the ball still mattered. New because when it broke with speed that made the air ripple. Familiar because the Camp Nou still sang the names it has always sung. New because one of those names belonged to a 9, whose energy shifted the temperature of every chase. When you have watched football long enough, you begin to sense when a project moves from experiment to identity. This one was almost there. Confidence swelled, but football loves reminders. Anoeta would teach them a lesson behind a door that needed closing. You can feel when a season is about to choose a direction. Early January, a gray Basque afternoon, and Barcelona walked into a stadium that had a habit of turning their legs to stone. They conceded early and never really found a pulse. When the whistle went, the scoreboard said defeat, but the mood said something colder: uncertainty. Rotation choices had annoyed the dressing room, fatigue had fogged decisions, and the press outside scented drama. Rumors sprouted overnight, of a rift, of a superstar's frown, of a coach whose demands were meeting resistance. The real correction happened where corrections always do, in a room with no cameras. Veteran voices asked for clarity. The coach asked for conviction. What needed fixing was not a formation diagram, but a contract of roles and responsibilities. Messi would work from the right without apology and be given the keys to conduct. Suarez would own the center lane, chase lost causes until they became chances, and be trusted with the last touch. Neymar would live on the left, choose violence or velvet as the moment required, and grow into a decision-maker. The midfield would stretch forward on cue, not by instinct alone. The backline would hold its nerve when the press left grass behind them. The meeting was not a coronation. It was a handshake. Everyone left knowing where to stand and when to run. Everyone left with the taste of the Anoeta loss still in their mouths. The only medicine, they agreed, would be the game itself. And from behind that closed door came clarity. But could clarity alone survive the relentless test that awaited from the Madrid? A week later, Atletico Madrid arrived at the Camp Nou, carrying their familiar, iron-backed certainty. It felt like a trial more than a fixture. What came instead was an unveiling. Neymar scored from the left, Suarez from the center, Messi from the right. 3 strikes that read like a thesis. This is who we are now. The sequence no one forgets is less the individual finishes than the speed at which ideas traveled between them. A disguised pass stepped through a lane that hadn't existed a second earlier. A diagonal run pulled a defender 3 steps out of place. A first touch set a second touch before anyone realized there would be one. It wasn't just the goals. It was the energy they gave to everything around them. When Suarez hunted a center-back into a mistake, Rakitic took half a step forward without thinking, and suddenly Barcelona were 30 meters higher. When Neymar slalomed inside, Jordi Alba slid outside on rails. When Messi dropped to the halfway line, Busquets shaded one lane to make sure the opponent could not spring a counter through the space he'd left. The team, in that 90 minutes, looked like a living system more than a collection of talents. And the stadium exhaled a month of worry all at once. They had their chord, their clarity. But would harmony survive as the engine began to run hotter, faster, stronger? From that day, the calendar flipped, as if pulled by invisible hands. In the league, the trio stopped scoring in moments and started scoring in waves. The difference was not showmanship, it was ruthlessness. Games that used to linger at 1-0 turned into 3-0 as the second and third big chances arrived because the opposition had spent all their attention on the first. Suarez planted himself on the last shoulder and darted across lines as if following chalk marks only he could see. Neymar chose cleaner angles and dirtier finishes when needed. Messi, liberated by the view from the right, began to manufacture chances the way great chefs make meals from memory. A sprinkle of balance here, a late run there, always the exact weight of pass. In the Copa del Rey, Neymar turned the tournament into his private runway. He ghosted at the back post, he scooped finishes over charging keepers. He arrived late with an assassin's calm. Each round sanded down another edge until only sharpness remained. Barcelona walked toward spring with a look that seasoned teams recognize. The look of a group that trusts its next 90 minutes more than it fears anyone else's. With domestic authority asserted, Europe's door stood ajar. But what happens when a knock becomes a declaration? February means Champions League football that counts. Manchester City offered experience and individual talent. They also offered space that Barcelona accepted like a gift. The front three didn't so much break lines as slide through them. The pattern that defined those nights was familiar by then, but no easier to stop. Messi receiving to feet, one defender tight, a second wary of the inside, a third watching Suarez's run, and then, click, the pass that threads all three puts a forward through. What impressed neutrals most wasn't just the beauty, but the refusal to decorate it. Barcelona were efficient on purpose. When a chance opened, they finished it with the pragmatism of a team that understands there is nothing more extravagant than a goal. By the time the quarterfinal draw said Paris, the rest of Europe was no longer asking if this trio worked. The question had become what, exactly, could stop it. Paris had been dissected, but in football, every statement is met with a louder question. Could Barcelona speak louder than Bavaria's pride? Against Paris Saint-Germain, Barcelona's forwards took turns sculpting the tie. In one leg you saw Neymar's smooth kill, the way he balanced a defender on a string and then rolled the ball past a keeper as if tugging on gravity. In the other you saw Suarez at his most impolite, twice nutmegging the same defender on surges that felt like courtroom exhibits labeled Exhibit A, relentlessness, Exhibit B, timing. Messi as ever hovered between them, a silent surgeon deciding where the next incision would be. The aggregate wasn't just comfortable, it was comprehensive. Barcelona had cut through a very good team without making a fuss about it. France applauded, Spain nodded, Germany bristled. Because up next was Bayern, a mirror that measures not just form, but nerve. Europe leaned in, breath held. Could a night arrive that slowed time, defined greatness, and revealed destiny itself? Some football nights arrive with so much history that you can feel the air vibrating an hour before kickoff. Barcelona versus Bayern in May felt like that. A reunion with a former mentor, a debate about philosophies disguised as a semi-final, and a reality check on whether this version of Barcelona could bend a heavyweight to its will. The first hour was a chess match played at sprint speed. Then, in a flash of minutes, Messi turned the board over. The first was a left foot strike cut so cleanly across the face of goal that the net looked polite catching it. The second was an act of balance and decision so pure it made professionals on both sides smile even as they winced. A feint that sent a great defender tumbling, and a finish hit earlier than anyone sane would hit it. In the space of those minutes, the tie changed temperature. Bayern still surged, as Bayern always do, but they had been marked. In the second leg, Barcelona's counters landed like jabs in a 12-round fight, and Neymar took his turn to underline the difference between potential and product. He glided into spaces that had the exact shape of anxiety for the defense, finishing moves with that open-body calm that makes goals look inevitable. Time may have slowed, but titles wait for no one. Could the crown rest on a single touch? Amid Europe's theater, the league demanded its own resolution. Barcelona traveled to the Calderón knowing that one more perfect 90 minutes would write the first line of a treble. The game was tense, narrow, full of duels and small violences. It was settled by the simplest thing. Messi took the ball at the top of the box, used a sliver of space that no one else believed existed, and slid a finish into the only square of grass where the keeper was not. A title can be decades of philosophy and years of planning. It is also often one touch hit just right. The Camp Nou celebrated in absentia. The players allowed themselves half an hour of noise and grins and a shared understanding. 2 more to go. A week later, in the Copa del Rey final, Barcelona met Athletic. The memory everyone carries from that night is a run down the right touchline that bent physics. Messi started deep, put the ball under his spell in a corridor of 3 defenders, and came out the other side with the same stride and a different angle. The finish was mean and precise. Neymar added what he tends to add on nights like those, the sense that when he smiles before shooting, the shot will hurt more. 2 trophies in their hands, one still gleaming in the mind. 2 trophies, yet Europe demanded one final, glorious proof. Would Berlin make the argument undeniable? Finals are careful, until they are not. Juventus had a shape that resists romance. Barcelona had a trio that makes pragmatism negotiate with beauty. Early, the ball moved the way a coached dream moves, from one side to the other, into a runner's stride, squared with calm, steered into the net. Then the final became what finals always become, a negotiation with nerves. Juventus found parity and belief. The match shook itself awake, and then a shot from outside the box was parried into the one place a predator wants it most. Suarez had followed the play because he always follows the play. He did not think about arc or angle. He thought about hitting through the back of the ball and ending an argument. When the net bulged, you could see what that goal meant on his face. The whole arc of a season collapsed into a single exhale. At the death, Neymar completed the scene and the season, sprinting the length of the field as if fueled by the knowledge that the last line of a story matters. 3-1, and the treble was real again, something the club had done before and no one had done twice until that night. The image that endures is the 3 of them together on the grass, silver close enough to touch, sweat shining like varnish. They looked less like colleagues than co-conspirators whose plan had worked. The treble achieved, but greatness always asks for more. Could they handle triumph's weight without losing their hunger? What they built across that season was not just a collection of highlights, but a grammar. You could understand a Barcelona move the way you understand a sentence. Subject, Messi on the right in possession. Verb, split. Object, Suarez, between center backs. Clause, Neymar, late, unmarked. Period, finish. Sometimes they wrote short sentences. Sometimes they wrote paragraphs. The midfielders provided punctuation, the fullbacks italics, the defense crossed out the rare mistake with composure. They changed, too, the idea of what Barcelona could be without betraying what Barcelona is. The ball remained the lodestar, but now there was a willingness to let chaos be a tool. They countered with intent, not as an admission of weakness, but as a choice of weapon. They pressed because they enjoyed stealing as much as they enjoyed creating. They did not play tiki-taka to appease a museum. They played a modern version of it to win. And they enjoyed each other audibly. The joy matters because it made the difficult parts tolerable. The repetition of drills, the criticism after a draw, the sore throat after shouting over noise in away grounds. The night after Berlin, sleep came late. In the hotel, families and staff and players carried the air of a wedding reception in the last hour. Tired feet, full hearts, jokes told too loudly. Somewhere quiet, the three forwards sat for 10 minutes and said not very much. You don't explain a season to the men who lived it. What you do in those minutes is notice that you are content and want to do it again. The morning after, the work already beckoned. Great teams are greedy in a way that is not about ego but about appetite. The summer would bring tours and ceremonies and days of sunshine, and then it would bring a new set of games that began 0-0. Titles do not roll over. The grace note of the treble season was the realization that even as they had peaked, they had learned how to climb. Each man had accepted a version of himself that served the trio. Messi did not have to be the point of every spear. He could be the hands that sharpened it and the mind that pointed it. Suarez did not have to prove he could score any kind of goal. He just had to score the ones this team generated and keep generating them with his movement. Neymar did not have to juggle the world. He had to feint at the right time, explode at the next, and keep his decision-making clean enough to make the flourish count. This phase ends at a summit. You can hear the wind up there and see a long way in every direction, but the task that follows any summit is not to stare, it is to descend carefully and then climb again. The next season would not ask whether Barcelona could be great. It would ask whether they could be great while carrying the weight of being expected to be great. It would ask what happens when the oldest star hurts his knee for a month and the other two have to prove that a trident is not one man and two ornaments. It would ask how a team responds when in April the gears grind with fatigue and doubt taps its watch. It would also ask whether joy can be a tactic. They will begin the next chapter as they began the last, with a glance and a ball. And then they will see if the sport can contain them twice, champions once, yet the morning after reveals appetites anew. How would Barcelona carry expectations heavier than ever before? If you are enjoying this story, leave a like and comment down below your favorite moment from this story so far. The summer after Berlin felt like the morning after a festival. Banners down, confetti swept, a city walking to work smiling at strangers. Triumph never guarantees tomorrow. It only proves what is possible. Barcelona returned to the training pitch with two truths in their pockets. One, the system worked because the people inside it had chosen each other. Two, the system had not reached its limit. Luis Enrique liked to say he didn't deal in monuments, he dealt in habits. If the trio wanted more, the habits had to be sharper than the memories. August delivered reminders that football loves symmetry and chaos in equal measure. In Georgia, against Sevilla, a Super Cup became a roller coaster, and then an overtime victory that felt like a shrug to the gods. We can do breathless too. In Spain, Athletic Bilbao punished sloppiness and took the domestic Super Cup, a quiet correction wrapped in a noisy scoreline. These were not omens so much as calibrations. The message, this season would not let anyone live on last season's oxygen. Then a single misstep left a constellation incomplete. Could the remaining stars shine brighter in absence? Late September at the Camp Nou. A misstep bent a knee the wrong way, and the stadium inhaled as one. Lionel Messi limped off. The diagnosis meant weeks, not days. The shape of the constellation changed. A lesser team would have treated the absence as a lament. Barcelona treated it as a test of truth. How much of last year was chemistry, and how much was gravity? Neymar and Suarez answered with performances that sounded like declarations. Responsibility did not make them grim, it made them precise. Neymar's game sharpened at the edges without losing the glitter in the middle. He stopped pausing to admire his own brushstrokes. He painted and moved on. The goal against Villarreal captured the mood of that stretch like a photograph. a flick over a defender with a dancer's insolence, and a volley that kissed the net before anyone knew whether to applaud or laugh. Suarez, meanwhile, became the team's heartbeat and metronome. He ran every sprint as if he'd been insulted, and cushioned every ball as if the ball had asked him a question, and he knew the answer. He made the penalty spot feel like a magnet, and the 6-yard box feel crowded, even when he stood alone. There's a certain authority in playing well without your best player. It quiets dissent, and it clarifies relationships. When Messi returned to training, the front two had not merely held ground, they had advanced the line. The reunion would be less about rehabilitation than reinvention. The Constellation had proven itself. But could they illuminate a night that makes even Madrid feel small? On a November night in the capital, Barcelona arrived at the Bernabeu with Messi on the bench, and the world waiting to see if the aura traveled without him. It did, magnificently. 11 minutes in, a simple pass became a perfect one when Sergi Roberto split a line and Suarez arced his run into daylight. The outside of the boot made a mockery of angles, and the net accepted an early truth. The visitors had come to conduct, not survive. The second goal felt like a parable. Iniesta threaded a path with the serenity of a man crossing a crowded room without touching anyone, and Neymar finished with the sort of calm defender's experience as rudeness. After the break, the third belonged to the captain in everything but armband. Andres arriving and rifling a strike that silenced the stadium long enough to hear the echoes of other eras. The fourth returned to the cutter who had made the first incision. Suarez completed the lesson by slipping the knife in a second time. When Messi entered in the second half, he did so as if returning to a party already in full swing. 4 goals to none. No bluster, no hysteria. Just football done with such certainty that a great arena sounded like a library. The effect of that night was simple and profound. It proved the trio is not an equation solved only with all 3 variables present. It proved the habits held. It also established a tone for the season. Barcelona would not wait to be judged in spring. They would dominate the conversation through winter. Madrid silenced, dominance assured. Yet greatness demands repetition. Could they remain unbeaten and unbothered in the relentless chase ahead? From autumn's chill into the New Year's bite, Barcelona went weeks without feeling defeat's taste. One match bled into another, and the numbers began to stack up, but the more significant truth was qualitative. They found different ways to control, to punish, to rest with the ball without falling asleep. The unbeaten run grew to a length that made history look over its shoulder. 39 matches across competitions without loss. A record is not a piece of paper, it is a tone in the throat, a way a dressing room carries itself. Training took on the sound of a well-oiled factory, shouts timed to movements, jokes snapped like passes, coaches stepping back just enough to let the machine hum. Within that run sat the practical joys that make campaigns feel like albums, not singles. December in Japan brought the Club World Cup and a final against River Plate that carried its own gravity. Barcelona treated it with respect and clarity. They walked on, played their way into rhythm, and then let the trio do what trios do. Messi stroking one home, Suarez twice attacking the space between center backs like a flood finding a valley. A trophy rarely tells you something you don't already know about a team. This one confirmed their appetite for symmetry. Win in Europe, then conquer the world that Europe feeds into. January and February added new chapters to the scrapbook. In a Copa semifinal first leg, Valencia were taken apart ruthlessly. 7 goals, 4 of them from Suarez, 3 from Messi, a scoreline that looked like typography gone mad. It wasn't cruelty, it was professionalism. If a door is open, walk through it. If it stays open, someone should ask why. In the league, there were nights when they throttled and nights when they tuned. The effect was the same. 90 minutes that ended with opponents exchanging looks that said the same thing in different languages.
What were we supposed to do? Against Celta Vigo in February, a penalty kick became a seminar. The ball on the spot, Messi standing over it with the stadium doing arithmetic, the keeper shifting weight as if trying to guess a secret, and then a pass instead of a shot, rolled calmly to the right for Suarez to finish. We call it playful because it looked like a joke. It was homage, too, a wink across decades to Johann's famous routine. It was, above all, a diagram in motion of trust. Even in a moment designed for a single set of shoulders, the instinct was to share. That decision, made in a heartbeat, contained the thesis of the trio's second year. Generosity can be as deadly as greed. The aftermath said as much about the group as the act. No gloating, no pointing. Just three men smiling at a puzzle solved in an unexpected way, and a coach who would later explain that you say very little to forwards when they are in this kind of mood. The famous line was half joke and half truth, abracadabra and sparks. Generosity amazed, but now came a stretch where perfection wasn't just asked for, it was expected. There are runs and seasons where even the hard parts look rehearsed. Barcelona hit one of those in late winter. The press looked synchronized to a drum track. Transitions tasted like blood to opponents who sensed the danger before it materialized and could do nothing to prevent it. Messi found a balance between conductor and soloist that made the debate about positions sound quaint. Neymar split his time between the touchline and the half spaces with an adult sense of timing. Suarez became what every defender hates most, predictable in his relentlessness. The off-ball movement in this stretch deserves its own paragraph because it barely appears in highlight packages, and yet it decides games. Runs at diagonals that made room for third men, decoy sprints into cul-de-sacs that opened boulevards for teammates, blindside checks that stole a yard on center backs whose shoulders were turned just a fraction the wrong way. Inside the dressing room, the voices stayed low. Everyone knew how quickly gravity can return. Yet there is joy in competence, in mastery exercised without strain. Training sessions felt like days at a craftsman's shop. Sand this edge, oil that hinge. Take the tool you used yesterday and use it again, but better. The unbeaten number ticked up. The rest of Spain chewed pencils. Perfection had ruled, yet even Barcelona must face the cruel reality of April's heavy toll. Would greatness stumble or soar? A long season will at some point ask for a toll. April arrived like a tax collector. First came the Clásico in Barcelona, and with it a reminder that no rivalry respects form. Barcelona controlled and created but did not kill. And Madrid did what Madrid do. They held on and then struck with blunt certainty. A late goal ended the match and ended the unbeaten run. Losses can be snowflakes or avalanches. This one threatened to start a slide. Days later, Anoeta asked the same old question and got the same old miserable answer. The game felt coated in wax. Passes died, runs misfired. The goal never looked quite the right size. It was not a crisis yet. It was a chart wobble. And then came the Champions League quarters, and the kind of opponent who would never offer comfort, Atletico Madrid. In the first leg, Barcelona nudged ahead. In the second, Atletico did what they've built a philosophy around. They applied vice-grip pressure on space. They turned duels into coin tosses, and won too many of them. And they made 90 minutes feel like a trench. Barcelona went out. A few days later, Valencia visited the Camp Nou and left with a win, the third league loss on the spin, and a stat that felt like a slap. The worst run of domestic form in more than a decade. Slumps are never just physical. They are perspective and breath and noise. Everyone around you talks louder. Training feels heavier. Shots that used to choose the corner now choose the keeper's hands. In that fortnight, the trio looked human in a way that frightened some and excited others.
But within the squad, something older than slumps asserted itself: stubbornness. Titles are decided at the point where pride and process intersect. The wall called April tested every nerve, but champions are defined by response. Could a single week reset everything? The reaction began with a bus ride to A Coruña. The opponent was Deportivo, the situation simple: stop bleeding. What happened looked like a dam bursting. Suarez scored 4 and assisted 3. The team scored 8. The press from the first minute said everything. Anger corrected by discipline. Suarez's night would have been absurd if it weren't so ruthlessly logical. He was first to rebounds, but also first to the pass that made rebounds possible. He bullied one center back and caressed the ball around the other. He finished with his laces and with his instep, high, low, through legs, around bodies. Every time he received, the defender's face spelled the same word: late. 3 days later, 6 past Sporting, with Suarez again scoring 4, this time from 2 penalties and 2 finishes that looked like training drills executed with grim intent. If the Deportivo night was catharsis, the Sporting night was confirmation. The scoring chart shifted under the weight of that week. The Pichichi race changed uniforms. More importantly, the table steadied. The conversations around the team changed tone. You can say the right things after a loss and still wonder if they are true. 8 and 6 say the right things for you. Betis away required patience. Barcelona found it. Espanyol at home required hunger. Barcelona devoured. The formula for the run-in was simple without being easy. Don't blink. Do the boring things sharply. Trust your distances. Allow skill to live inside discipline. Above all, don't wait for someone else to make the moment, make it yourself. The reset achieved, yet leagues hinge on final days. Would Granada bring glory, or would greatness succumb to mathematics? The last day arrived with mathematics on the table. Real Madrid were close enough to matter. Barcelona had no room for drama. Granada away is not an occasion that inspires poetry. And that was the point. This was a night for grown-ups. From the start, the trio played as if they'd discussed the script at breakfast. Neymar kept dragging fullbacks short and then flipping behind them. Messi kept inviting midfielders to chase him into zones where he could turn and watch the space they'd left. Suarez kept hanging on the shoulder, as if attached by wire to the last defender. The first goal came like a breath let out. A low cross, a striker's line, a toe that arrived first. The second was a picture book header, body shape perfect, neck snap pure, the net rippling like a flag. Late on, with anxiety trying to creep in through cracks that weren't really there, the third. A simple finish to end a complicated race. 3 for Suarez, 3 for Barcelona, and the league belonged to them again. He finished the season with 40 in the league, remarkable and deserved. It is one thing to score many. It is another to score when everyone knows you must. On the pitch afterwards, the images told the story better than the scoreboard did. Suarez grinning like a schoolboy, Messi pulling him into a hug that said both congratulations and I told you so, Neymar clapping his hands at the fans and then at his friends. At times this trio looked like a superhero story. On days like this, they looked like colleagues whose competence would be boring if it weren't so beautiful. Titles secured, but greatness measured at close range demands reflection. Had Barcelona surpassed themselves?
A season isn't defined only by its peaks, but by the way it handles its valleys. The double, league and cup, told the cold truth of the ledger. The details told the warmer truth of the journey. The unbeaten run wasn't just about invincibility, it was about consistency. The penalty pass wasn't just about cheek, it was about trust. The 4-0 in Madrid wasn't just about humiliation, it was about control. And the April slump wasn't just about fatigue, it was about the cost of trying to live at altitude for 10 months straight. Individually, the arcs glowed.
Messi managed the transition from perpetual scorer to perpetual everything with a grace that made positional labels collapse. He would drop to receive like a regista, advance like a 10, finish like a 9, and press like a winger, often in the same move. When Carlo, watching from the outside, said that Barcelona with Messi are something else, he was only half paying a compliment. He was stating a problem opponents could not solve. Neymar matured in fast forward. The showman learned to choose which trick belonged in which moment. He scaled his invention without cutting its power. When a fullback squared up, he could be cruel. When a lane opened, he could be kind to a teammate. Suarez became the striker who wins leagues, relentless, unembarrassed by ugly goals, equally proud of a cutback as of a curler, on time to every near-post meeting. From inside the squad, the tribute sounded simpler and therefore truer. "Best trio I've seen," said the defensive midfielder who has seen everything. "They manage their egos for the benefit of the team," said the center-back who knows what dissonance feels like. The coach laughed when asked what he tells them. "Abracadabra," he said, "and sparks." Hyperbole perhaps, or just an admission that sometimes the best instruction is to get out of the way. The season revealed a truth deeper than victory. But could they convincingly demonstrate the difference between being enough and being even more?
Barcelona did not repeat the treble. Europe slipped, as it slips for almost everyone almost every year. And yet the second season suggested an argument as bold as the first. In certain stretches, they were better. They scored more together than any trio ever had. They won the club's first back-to-back domestic doubles in decades. They showed that the magic of a system can survive the absence of its brightest star, and that the magic of a star can coexist with the discipline of a system. They showed, too, that joy scales. It is one thing to smile when you win easily. It is another to smile when you choose the hard option because it is the right one. If you watched closely, you saw micro-evolutions. The midfield's verticality increased by degrees. The fullbacks learned when to underlap and when to wait deep. The center-backs passed through lines instead of around them when the press invited that risk. And always, the front three adjusted. Angles, distances, eye contact. By the end of spring, their choreography was so refined that a new viewer might mistake it for simplicity. That is usually how mastery presents itself, as something you could imagine doing until you try. Europe lost, yet domestic glory remained. Could the double provide answers that treble glory alone could not? The season ended where these things always end, in a locker room smelling of cut grass and champagne, in a city with fireworks in its throat, in photographs that will live on mantelpieces in Montevideo and Rosario and Modi das Cruzes. The league trophy glowed next to the domestic cup, and in the shadows behind them stood the shape of what had been built. Not just wins and records, but a way of playing that will be talked about years from now with the affectionate certainty people reserve for the moments that made them feel lucky to watch. They had climbed twice. They had slipped and climbed again. They had done it in a way that kept the wonder intact. Part 4 will tie the knot on the era, what the double meant to the club's identity, but the cup final in Madrid gave them in suffering and in joy, how the trio's friendships became a tactic, and how the legacy looks now that the years have had time to argue with the memories. For now, remember the November night in Madrid when a stadium felt small, the February afternoon when a penalty became a thesis, the April week that demanded a response, and a May evening in Granada when a hat-trick carried a season across the line. If you are enjoying this story, leave a like and comment down below your favorite moment from this story so far. A double can feel like a parade or like a mirror. The parade tells you you are better than everyone else and deserve confetti. The mirror asks whether you are better than yourself. After the league title in Granada and the tears of relief at the Calderón months earlier, Barcelona still had one more night of proof to stage. The domestic cup final waited in Madrid against a Sevilla side that treats finals as a second home. It was not a backdrop for easy flourishes. It was a testing ground for nerve. The weight of that second trophy was heavier than its silver suggests because of what came before it. The stumble in April, the quiet recalibration, the stubborn insistence that quality is a habit, not a mood. You could read the double as a continuation of the treble year, or as an answer to a different question. The first season with the trio had shown how high the ceiling was. The second showed how thick the walls were. When the house shook, it did not crack. That is why clubs remember doubles as arguments won, not just as mathematics achieved. The double offered answers, yet one more night remained to prove that nerves were not weakness, but strength, waiting for release.
Finals are about choices made under pressure. On the night in Madrid, it was hot in the way cup finals are always hot. Temperature, tempers, tempo. Sevilla came with teeth bared. Barcelona came with that particular blend of patience and impatience that defines seasoned winners. For long stretches, the game was an exercise in control without incision, in waiting for the one pass that hurts instead of 10 that decorate. Extra time arrived like a door finally opening. The first goal did not look like improvisation. It looked like repetition remembered at the exact right second. Messi looked up and found a diagonal that only players at his altitude can see, and Jordi Alba ghosted into the space at the back post like a sprinter who knows the tape is coming. The finish had the certainty of a signature. Near the end, the triangle that defined an era traced one more line. A delicate exchange sprung Neymar through to apply the final brushstroke. 2-0, the trophy held by arms that had already carried a season's fatigue and satisfaction. That night gave the year a proper ending, because it condensed the theme of the campaign. When the match turns into a test of attrition, do the right thing next. It wasn't a canvas for solo arias. It was a recital in which everyone hit their note when it mattered. And that made the celebration feel different from the year before. Berlin had been release and spectacle. Madrid felt like a nod between professionals who know what it took. With titles secured through tactics, could friendship itself become the ultimate tactical advantage? People outside a team call it chemistry. Inside, they call it knowing. By the second season, the friendship between the three forwards had become a tactical advantage as real as a set piece. It was visible in the unglamorous choices, the extra pass instead of the tight-angle shot, the blind side block of a defender's lane to clear a channel for a teammate, the run made at 90% because the decoy was more important than the reception. The pen pass against Celta was the pretty picture on the cover. The book's content was repetition of kindness under speed. They wore their rapport lightly. On a Monday, it looked like three families sharing a barbecue, and on a Wednesday, it looked like a trap sprung in the 6-yard box. They made a point of distributing status. When a goal went in, fingers pointed to the passer as often as to the scorer. When media attention swung inevitably toward one of them, the other two shrugged and moved the ball to the man in form without a second thought. If ego is a toxin, their antidote was habit. The crew in midfield sensed it and mirrored it. Iniesta fed the hot foot. Rakitic made the run that turned a pair into a trio. Busquets erased the mistake no one else saw and carried on as if nothing had happened. You could argue, convincingly, that their friendship added 3 to 5 goals a month that lesser relationships would have squandered. Tap-ins not passed, angles not seen, runs not made. Multiply that by a season, and you are no longer talking about vibes, you are talking about titles. Friendship defined tactics. Yet the debate lingered. Had Barcelona compromised style or evolved it? Barcelona is always in conversation with itself. The discussion never really ends. it changes tense. In the years before the trio, the club had painted a mural of control, possession for its own sake, only until it became possession with a knife. The arrival of the new front three invited a debate that sounds academic until you hear it shouted on a radio show. Had the club chosen individuality over system? Had it traded the slow suffocation of positional play for something more primal? The second season provided the useful context. With the trio, the ball did not become less important. Space did. Luis Enrique's version did not throw away the academy's grammar. It added verbs. It asked the forwards to attack faster when the page offered a blank line, and to read slower when nothing was on. It asked the midfield to verticalize without losing composure. It asked the back line to accept more risk because the reward was greater. It asked the goalkeeper to be a 10th outfield player when the opponent tried to press the first pass. In the biggest games, you saw the blend clearly. A long possession to rest the legs, a sudden punch when a center-back shaved a pass into Messi's feet on the half-turn, a counter-attack launched not as a break from identity, but as a natural expression of it. The comparison with the Guardiola years tempted journalists because it made good copy, but it missed the point the players understood instinctively. Identity is not a museum piece. It is a living room. You move the furniture so people can sit where they need to sit. Philosophies argued, yet numbers would tell a different story. What hidden truth lay within the cold data? The totals by the end of the 2-year window said what numbers can. In the first season together, more than 120 goals between them. In the second, even more, a record for a trio in a single campaign, a league reclaimed and then defended, 2 domestic cups held up in consecutive years, a European crown, a Club World Cup, an unbeaten run that stretched across the calendar like a taut string. Yet the numbers lean on stories to mean anything. The 4 in Madrid told you about control on a hostile night. The 7 against Valencia told you about concentration without mercy. The hat-trick in Granada told you about closure under pressure. The pass from 12 yards to a teammate on a penalty told you about joy's role in ruthlessness. Stats will sit on a page forever. The memory of certain movements will not sit at all. It will rush back into your chest uninvited when a commentator says a name. You can measure the individual arcs too. Messi moved further into the role of creator without vacating the role of finisher, a paradox only the great can live. The knee injury in autumn might have spooked a lesser competitive soul. Instead, it clarified his use of himself. Neymar drifted from prodigy to professional and then kept the magic. Fewer needless touches, more deadly ones. The tricks didn't stop, they learned purpose. Suarez churned through defenders as if they were tasks on a list and smiled only after the list was done. He scored the old-fashioned goals that separate champions from entertaining teams. Tap-ins, scruffy rebounds, headers in traffic, volleys off imperfect deliveries. The pretty ones came too, but his season told a specific truth. The league gives the prize to the man who arrives most often, not only to the one who arrives most beautifully. Numbers had their say, yet behind every star lay unsung heroes. Who were these players whose contribution spoke louder than applause? It is tempting to write this era as a 3-man play, but the supporting cast carried weight you only notice when you miss it. Iniesta, in the late autumn of his prime, played like a lantern. He didn't always light the whole room. He lit the right corner at the right time. Rakitic's value was sometimes a ghost story, told at night after games, disbelief in the voice. Because the runs beyond the line that scrambled defensive shapes did not live in highlight packages. Busquets conducted with the kind of authority that refuses applause. The way he took a step left to remove a passing lane and then a step right to reopen a different one should be studied in schools. Fullbacks were not decorations, they were levers. Alba stretched games to breaking. Alves moved inside sometimes to add a line-breaker's brain to midfield, and outside sometimes to add a crosser's foot to the front. Piqué and Mascherano did not get a fraction of the credit they deserved for defending open spaces so the trio could run free. In goal, two elite keepers shared a workload that often required bravery first and saves second. The bench gave breath to tired legs, and breath is an ingredient in most late-season wins we forget to list. The point is not to diffuse the praise. It is to place it in the correct box. The trio pulled focus because they scored. The rest of the cast sharpened the focus because they made the scoring likely. Heroes acknowledged, yet greatness invites critics. What did those who watched and those who played really say when honesty slipped through?
Doubts make sport interesting. The skeptical voices in the summer of their formation asked whether three dribblers could be a team. The first season offered one kind of answer. Yes, if they choose to be. The second season offered a better one. Yes, and sometimes choosing to be a team makes each dribbler more dangerous than he would be alone. Coaches on the outside said quietly what they rarely say in public. With the trio on the field, your margin for error disappears. Even when you set your trap perfectly and spring it on time, they could pass around it as if it were a puddle. Inside their own locker room, the compliments were practical. The veteran at the back called Neymar the best one-on-one artist he'd ever seen, Messi the most complete, and Suarez the man you least want to turn your back on inside the box. Midfielders talked about the feeling a passer gets when he knows a run will be made, a trust that changes the weight and shape of a pass by millimeters and makes all the difference. The coach in charge admitted that sometimes his instruction was to let talent breathe. That was not abdication, that was management. When elite intuition is calibrated and aligned to the team's incentives, you do not overcoach it. You give it the ball in the time and you demand the defensive work that earns the right to attack again. The grander comparisons to the great sides of the previous cycle are a pub conversation that will never end. They are less useful than the simple admission others made through gritted teeth. For 2 seasons, this front three set the standard. Some thought it surpassed what came before. Others thought it matched it in a different style. The trio was the reason the debate existed at all. Critics answered, legacies established. But what comes after applause fades and the lights dim? The era's 2-year window had a natural feel to it. Ascent, coronation, defense, and something like transcendence. What came next for each player belongs to other stories. What matters here is the shape they left behind. The club spent the years after trying to replicate the triangle's force with different names. Sometimes the talent matched, sometimes the fit did not. The sport changed, as it always does. Presses became more choreographed, defensive lines more daring, transitions faster and more common. The trio's influence was visible in how young forwards around the world learned to share, to cut at angles, to see the third man run as a first instinct. Legacy is what remains when the arguments quiet down. The trio's legacy is threefold. First, they taught a club synonymous with a single vision, that its identity could carry multiple accents and still sound like itself. Second, they turned friendship into an offensive mechanism, not a slogan. Third, they gave ordinary weeks the feeling of an event. Fans went to the stadium hoping to see something they had never seen before, because the probability of that, during those seasons, was not small. It was reasonable. After the applause, a final reflection. What truly defines greatness when viewed from afar? If you strip the narrative down to its bones, you are left with a few sentences that will be repeated as long as the club sings. When Messi moved to the right, he did not shrink, he multiplied. When Neymar learned not to play every note, he started writing songs. When Suarez stopped trying to prove the world wrong and simply went to work, the world lost arguments of its own. Together, they showed that fear can be persuaded to switch sides. Defenders began games bracing for embarrassment and ended them hoping only to avoid catastrophe. And yet the trio did not gloat. They laughed at training ground pranks. They hugged when the cameras wanted them to glare. They threaded their celebrations with humility that did not dim their greatness. There is a picture fans keep in their minds that will outlast data points. It is not the three kneeling by the European Cup, though that one will do. It is the picture of them jogging back to halfway after a goal, heads turned toward one another, exchanging one sentence with their eyes. Again. That quiet expectation was the scariest weapon they had. It said, "We will do it again, and we will do it without rushing, because that is how inevitable things happen." Greatness defined, yet every story returns home. What lasting image would rise when dawn illuminated the Camp Nou once more? We began at dusk. Let us end at dawn. The Camp Nou is empty except for the ground's crew and the birds. In a few hours, supporters will share coffee and stories on their way to the turnstiles. For a moment now, the pitch belongs to memory. If you squint, you can see three figures at halfway, as if called back by the grass itself. One to the right, listening to a melody and ready to conduct another. One central, already on his toes, already measuring the center backs for the day's inconveniences. One left, shoulders rolling, first touch warmed in his mind. They do not start the match again. Time doesn't allow that. They start the feeling again. Of possibility, of danger sharpened by beauty, of a club discovering that its past is a foundation, not a leash. They were friends before they were a system. They became a system without ceasing to be friends. They trusted one another enough to make the hard choices, to share the light, to run when the other could walk, to step back when the trio needed space more than it needed a single name. The era of Messi, Suarez, and Neymar across those 2 seasons belongs to the kind of memory that grows, not fades. The numbers will hold their weight for as long as people care to argue. The style will continue to echo in stadiums where young players cut inside and look for a runner without even thinking why. The legacy lives in a city that still glows when you mention their names together. 3 shadows at dawn. 3 signatures on the same page, 3 routes to the same destination. For a time, they were what football could be, when ability, appetite, and affection pull in the same direction. For a time, they were the answer to a question the sport did not know it had asked. And for anyone who watched closely, they still are. If you enjoyed this story and would like to hear more, subscribe, leave a like, and comment down below which team, era, or player you would like to see one on next.